Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Laura Hanson with Connect My Brain. So we are involved in a series where I am reviewing different cases that I have had either in the past or things that are going on right now that I think can be really important to discuss with my audience, as well as hoping that you will share this podcast so that we can help as many children as we possibly can, because this has been a critical time. There's been a lot that has gone on in the last 2.5 years, and it continues to go on because there are children that have been incredibly impacted, especially as it relates to the ability to develop language. And I see this over and over and over again. So I want to talk about that today. So lately, there's been numerous phone calls about children whose language is delayed. And obviously, there are some traditional ways of going about that. But the thing I think that happens, and I've seen it in my practice, and I've been doing this now for 27 years, there is a typical approach that our traditional medical model follows, and no judgment, but it has a tendency to only look at the age that the child is right now. And when we're talking about children 3 and 4 years old that are not developing their language, they are closer to the beginning of their development than even having already gone through so many of those developmental windows, like I've talked about in numerous podcasts. So the gut develops at age 2, the immune system is age 3, auditory, the laying out of the frequencies of auditory goes on for the first 3 years of life. So it's not a magic step that you go and plug in and automatically language is going to turn on. So I really want to step into that because there's a lot of parents that have been calling to brain map their child for neurofeedback, and the child is 3 and 4 years old. Now, we can absolutely map children. There's nothing wrong with that. But I want to give you some background of development, and then I want to explain a little bit about brain mapping, neurofeedback, especially for the pediatric population, and then what's an ideal approach, because it is a real thing. We are now seeing many children that have delays that are emphasized with the last 2.5 years of things that have gone on in our culture. And we're going to talk specifically about that. So let's talk a little bit about the backbone to how this body, this little baby, gets wired. And there's a fabulous neurobiologist. His name is Bruce Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton. And he worked on the Genome Project years ago, where the pharmaceutical industry, as well as neurocellular biologists and other scientists, came together in order to try to identify how many genes the human genome has, with a goal in mind that there could potentially be a pharmaceutical drug created for every different type of genetic malfunction that could be identified. What was so interesting was that we found, or they found, I shouldn't say we because I wasn't there, but what they found was the human genome didn't have any more genes than an inchworm. And what that meant was, okay, then what impacts the gene? And what is believed and has been practiced in many medical programs, and even to this day, it is still practiced, is identifying that the nucleus of the gene is what determines everything. And if the nucleus is removed, the gene is going to die. And unfortunately, or the cell is going to die. I'm sorry, the cell is going to die. And that's not true. What they literally found was if you took the nucleus out of the cell, then the cell did not die immediately. So what does that mean? Well, Bruce Lipton has a book. It is called The Biology of Beliefs, and it literally dives into really looking at this concept of cellular energy, what's represented in that cell, and what's represented in that cell is every single organ of us. So there is a respiratory system inside the cell. That's the mitochondria. So when I think about the mitochondria, excuse me. When I think about the mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell, and today we hear that there is mitochondrial defect going on in children, especially in the population that's diagnosed with autism, how can I put those concepts together? So this idea of the cellular energy is really being taken apart as it's impacted by the environment. And the environment is inside as well as outside our body. So it is our thoughts. It is how we move through life. It is how we live. And each of those elements plays a huge part in how the cell is going to function. And so this biology of beliefs, or there's another great book called Healing Codes that also really talks a lot about cellular energy. And I love that book because it dives in to the stress response. And for me, that's really the heartbeat of how I practice. And it really came together for me when I learned about primitive reflexes, and I learned about the Moro reflex, the withdrawal reflexes, and how that Moro reflex activates the sympathetic nervous system 9 weeks in the womb. How could we possibly take away the experience of mama and the impact it would have on her baby? And it's not just mama, because there is daddy. And what Bruce really talks about, and I've gone and listened to him so many times, is that it's even a few weeks before the conception comes together, and what's going on for that mother and father will ultimately have an impact on their baby. So I've talked about this before. It's the idea of literally planning to have a baby, looking at your own state of health, and not just from a subjective point of view, how do I feel? Because I ask that question all the time. And it's only been a handful of times in 27 years that I actually have met couples that have planned to have their baby. And now I even see on the other side of the diagram, so many young couples don't want to have babies because they're afraid. So there's so many things that can impact our well-being. And if we think about these little people right now, 3 and 4 years old, 2 years old, that are really already demonstrating anxiety. When I've got a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old that parents have already brought them to the pediatrician, and the parents are being told your child has anxiety. As a culture, we've got to realize this is not okay. And if this pattern is not changed immediately, this will have such a far-reaching impact on this child. And it isn't just 2, 3s, and 4s, it's 5, 6. We have so many kids that are being labeled anxious. We got to connect the dot back to really ourselves first, because that baby is closer to the timeline of developing inside of mama's womb. And whatever was going on for mom and dad prior to the conception, during the pregnancy, and ultimately during labor, delivery, the first year. And when I think about the families that have had babies or were pregnant when all of the stuff started 2.5 years ago, there has to be a stress response that is worth considering. And unfortunately, what I think happens is we use that word so frequently, it's kind of like pulling tissue out of a box. We don't really think it's a big deal, but it is. There's physiological reactions that go on. And really, if you dive in and do any kind of search on all the different health pathologies, there is an element that will always point to that stress plays a role. So when I'm using this term right now, it probably sounds more like, how do I feel, right? What am I thinking about? What am I going through? Okay, so that is absolutely one stress. So we have stress about everything that's been going on. Right now, it's really escalated. It has to do with inflation, the cost of groceries, the cost of gas. Where is our country going? What's going on in the world? How has all of this impacted each and every one of us? And each and every one of us know that there was significant shifts that happened in our world to people. People lost their job. I can tell you here, we are having such a hard time finding help. So me as a business owner, there is stress in trying to provide service to my community, but not having enough help in order to deliver to the number of people that we really could be delivering to. And I'm just one little element. This is going on everywhere. You see help wanted signs everywhere. Many of us sit here and scratch our heads going, how are these other people living? But it's a real thing. How about people that have lost their jobs? Maybe they didn't want to comply to something and they literally lost their job. Wonder if you had your own business and you lost your business. Meanwhile, your wife is pregnant or you have 5 kids, whatever the case may be. These are definitely things that we're going to think about as mental stressors, okay? And yes, it has an impact. There's a physiological reaction. And when we have these types of stressors, And some of it is you need it. You got to grow your muscles to be able to handle stress. However, stress isn't meant to stay on like a running loop. It isn't supposed to stay on. Think about your air conditioner. Well, right now we'll call it the heater, okay? Because it's November. So if I set the heat at 60 and the temperature drops down to 59, the heat's supposed to kick on. When the temperature comes up, the heat shuts off. That's the way your stress response is supposed to turn on, turn off. But we can get ourselves in a state that it never turns off. And it changes. There's got to be a chemical bath that's going on inside of the body. We're changing blood flow in the brain. It's going from the front of the brain to the back of the brain. The front of the brain is executive function. The back of the brain is the cerebellum. It's the movement. It's the precision and coordination of movement and memories and learning. And then there's a physiological change inside the gut because the brain's going, look, you got to fight or run. You don't need to worry about digesting, eliminating, reproducing. You just need to prepare yourself to fight or run. That's going to change the blood flow all the way down to the most distal end of your body, your fingers and your toes. Are you an individual that has chronically cold hands and feet? Now, yes, there can be some autoimmune conditions that generate that, but that is also now going to go in the category of chemical stress. But you can also have mental stress that's aggravating an autoimmune problem going on in your body and furthering the choking off of blood vessels at the most distal end of your hands and feet. It's a layer. We don't work in compartments. We work as a concert. And one thing does impact the other. So from mental stress, you could now have gut issues. Now we've got two issues. We've got the mental stress and we've got the gut stress. And then because you don't feel good, maybe you're not getting up and moving around. So now we've got mental stress, we've got chemical stress, and we've got mechanical stress. And all three of those can go on at the same time. If I have a pregnant woman and she's told she's got to be on bed rest, that's going to create a mechanical stress to the baby because the baby is not getting that movement, and it's going to interrupt neurological connections being laid down. And that child coming into the world with that kind of backbone to their development in the womb is going to change their developmental progression. And the same thing is true about language. Language is a mechanical, neurological development. So today, what I did is I brought up the Dr. Laura's Guide to Developmental Milestones. And I want you to feel free to go on to the website, connectmybrain.com. This is a free download. Now, I will tell you, this is not all inclusive, but in order not to have 25 pages, this is a way to condense it down to get you to look at some highlights. So your developmental milestones are literally the things that we use as signposts to say, is that child moving in the right direction? Now, for the podcast audience, you can't see that I'm sharing my screen right now. And we're having some trouble with our YouTube, but rest assured, I'm going to get it straightened out and we're going to get all these videos uploaded. But you can still go to connectmybrain.com and go to the podcast, and the developmental milestones is a free download. So when we look at milestones, this is a map. How did your little person do in getting wired up? Because again, 2, 3, 4, 5, you're closer to this than having been on the planet. Now you're in puberty, or now you're even 8 years old, which is a huge transitional time. So look at gross motor. By 4 weeks, you should be able to hold that head up. If that child cannot hold the head up, that is a red flag. 3 months, head and shoulders should be supported by the forearms. If your child doesn't want to be on their belly, your baby doesn't want to be on their belly, that is a red flag. Now, let's look down here, social skills. This is a huge one as it relates especially to language. By 2 months, your baby should be smiling. Now, everybody thinks this baby is just like in joy and smiling, but there's a deeper picture going on, and these are called mirror neurons. You are so happy with your little baby, and you are constantly looking at that little baby, and you are smiling. When you're a baby and you come into this world, you can really see about 6 to 10 inches. Okay. So what you're picking up as it relates to mama's face is the features. Like I have dark hair. So the outline of my dark hair, my eyebrows, any creases, the nostrils, the eyes, the baby is picking up these shadows because it takes about 10 weeks postnatal before those eyes, the vision is more adult-like. You come into this world seeing 2400. You have to go through 10 weeks in order to take all this sensory. Think about where the baby was. It was in mama's womb in dark amniotic fluid. It's going to take a transition. Always keep the word transition in your mind relating to the Moro reflex. The baby has got to go through transition to develop the eyes. So what's happening is that mirror neuron is literally like a mirror, and the baby is reflecting what it sees. So if mom's eyebrows go up, if mom's face goes up, if mom's mouth goes up, what else is going up? The tone in my voice. So that's connecting the dots to auditory. And when you come into this world, you hear low frequency sounds and acquire middle and high over the first 3 years of life. Now look at the communication for those that are watching this on video or for my podcast audience. Under communication, by 7 weeks, your baby is cooing. Guess what cooing is? It's the vowel sound. Ah, ooh, ee. It's the vowel sounds that are starting to be laid down, reflecting, mirroring. Mama going, you are such a little baby. And the child is beginning to pick up the sound. But by 9 months, that baby is expressing joy and pleasure. 5 months, 1 syllables. Now we're putting in the hard sounds like da, ma. By 8 months, it's 2 syllables. By 12 months, it's 2 to 3 words. Now, it doesn't mean that your baby doesn't know anything else. It literally means this is what your baby's wires have connected to. And this is what they're able to physically do. But I promise you, in that perfect environment, in that perfect world experience, these children understand, these babies understand so much. Now, what are some of the obstacles that have played a part in disrupting? So we've talked about that stress. That stress can be mechanical. It can be the mental thought life and the challenges. These are real things. This is not what I'm referring to when we talk about mental illness. This is the challenges that human beings go through, and it's real, and we have these emotions. And sometimes they can run away like a freight train. What was that state when you conceived this baby? Not just conception either. When we're talking about 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we are also talking about the development of the subconscious mind and whatever mama and dada were going through during this season of when this subconscious mind was going through or developing. That baby was incredibly impacted. The subconscious mind begins around the last trimester of pregnancy, and it goes all the way through around 7.5 to 8.5 years of age. What you go through impacts the development of your child's mind. So when you're running this inventory, that's the stuff that I really want you to spend some time, write it down, what was going on, so that you could begin to understand what has potentially impacted your child's development. The subconscious mind is like the hardwire of a computer. If you go and buy a computer, it has just the makings of the computer. You can't go on there and write a letter. If you want to write a letter, you got to add a software program that will allow you to do that. I want you to think of the software programs of what would happen to our mind after that 7.5 to 8.5 year transition. And now that child is functioning from what the hardwire built in to their system. Whatever that experience was becomes the lens that we look at life. We all have the same stuff up here in our brain, but the way that it came together, the way that your networks got lined up, whatever is wired together, fires together. And this is why there's differences in each of us, because our initial experiences were different. You may relate to this as an adult and think back of things that you went through as a child. And yes, it has impacted you as well. And it has become the lens that you look at the world today. Think of those eyes, those mirror neurons. You have been influenced. You truly are an acorn. And if you want to change those patterns, you have to change the patterns in your brain. And I applaud parents for reaching out and wanting to look at their child's brain, because you're absolutely right. And if we can do the map comfortably, meaning that it does not cause additional stress for the child, then it can be a fabulous tool. And I have no problem mapping. But most children right now that are having these same types of issues with interrupted language development, at least that's the one that is being seen, where I believe the rest of the story is invisible, and why looking at a developmental assessment is so powerful in letting you know how your child got wired up. But if trying to put your child in a chair, put a cap on their head, and map them is going to cause incredible stress, the child is not ready for that. So the child comes in just from the developmental assessment. And the wonderful part is, as things come together for your child, as we work on those mechanical interruptions that literally are the foundation that bring the brain online, the movement pieces, the milestones. As we improve those, then as your child comes together, we put them in a chair and we map them. Now you get to see, wow, you remember what it was like when we tried to put the child in there and it caused so much stress. And now they walk up, sit down, put the cap on. It's no big deal. That shows you that their anxiety is done. They're calmer because they have a perception of self and where they are. Always keep in mind when you come into this world, you are fully formed, but you are not fully functioning. You must go through these milestones in order to wire up the brain. If it gets interrupted, you stay down in the brainstem. You're closer to the beginning. That Moro reflex is going to kick in for survival. And now we've got fear paralysis. We've got to break the pattern of stress so that we can change the environment inside of the person. And then it's like a set of dominoes. Things begin to move forward. So in the last couple of years, some of those mechanical obstacles that have, in addition to stress, further impacted our children is mask wearing. I'm going to put my hand over my mouth. If you're watching this on the video, you'll totally get it. But for the podcast audience, I want you to hear the differences in the fluctuation of my voice. So if I'm looking at my little one going, oh, I love you so much, and I'm so glad you're a boy, I'm so glad you're a girl, I'm so glad that you're here.
I love you so much. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're a boy. I'm so glad you're a girl. I love you so much.
It doesn't take much to hear the differences and how that was the sensory stimulation that went on in that environment. And I still see little ones masked up today. It's not only the auditory, but they didn't get to see the movement of the mouth. And when we speak, our mouth moves, our facial expressions change, and the mirror neuron was disrupted. And that has a very far-reaching effect in the development of the brain. So what can we do? Well, first of all, I'm always going to tell you, if you're here in the Atlanta area, you have no reason not to come and have a developmental assessment. Even if you live somewhere else, I do consultations remotely, and I can help you get started. And there's so many things that parents can do. Many children that are coming in right now, they're really not ready for the full program. So we start off 1 month at a time. We start working on integrating those reflexes. We start helping that child come into a new environment, transition, and learn how to be comfortable. And then the integration begins to happen. We're coaching parents on things that they can do at home. We have one little person that I just have made this little person my what I call my poster child, because in 6 weeks' time, there has been such an enormous change. When the first time in here, incredible fear paralysis. 6 weeks. Now, I'd love to tell you that it happens that fast for everybody, but I do think the parents are doing great things. They have already wonderful eating habits and practices, but there was an issue even at school, and it was raising up some fear for the parents that they were going to have to find a new school. That always makes parents very uncomfortable, and I can totally understand. But guess what? They got a report. Everything is great, and we're moving on. And that's what it's all about, especially when you're so little. If I go back and I start closer to the beginning of how this marvelous nervous system comes together, it really does move very quickly. The longer you wait, the harder it is. This is the heartbeat of Connect My Brain. Neurofeedback is a fabulous tool, but if the child is not in their body, we are not ready for neurofeedback. And in fact, I'm working on an additional credential in neurofeedback right now, and I had to work with a mentor, and I had to choose from a group that was certified to be a mentor through the board. And I happened to work with a psychiatrist, and he is great. But he too was so impressed with our program. And he mentioned that he had been trying to tell his colleagues, it is so important to understand a child's development before you just plop them in front of a chair and do neurofeedback. And he's asked me to contribute a chapter in his book. And I'm very excited because it's all done and it's getting ready to come out the end of this year, first of next. And it is about explaining this very concept. But neurofeedback is an incredible tool. And when your child is ready, we're going to put it into the program as quickly as we can, because I've been doing neurofeedback now since 2008, and I've never seen anything pull things together the way that it is intended and as quickly as somebody could possibly do it. And I know we live in a world that we want things now, but you have to do it in a timely way. You also need to allow whoever you're working with to guide you. This is not something that you should push and pull against all the time. If there's any challenge that I find in my career is when either an individual or parents are not on board with the whole package, meaning mechanical chemical brain, or for an adult following a particular progression in, let's say, neurofeedback. Understanding neurofeedback is not a standalone. It is meant to have a balance with chemistry. It is meant to have a balance with movement, whether you're a child or an adult. It's a fabulous tool, but it's one of the elements. The way we come together is mechanical, chemical, and brain. Thanks for joining me today. If you would like to have a complimentary consultation, please go over to the website, connectmybrain.com, and you can fill in a request form, and I'll be happy to call you. Let me know what times work for you. If you want to call the office, the number here is 678-501-5172. It's always a pleasure to share information with you. And I don't know when you'll actually be listening to this, but I hope you have a fabulous Thanksgiving and Christmas season. Until the next time, this is Dr. Laura. Be blessed.